The way that homes are bought and sold in the Kansas City area is about to change dramatically. By now, you've probably heard of the massive lawsuit settlement involving how real estate agents are compensated, and those changes are slated to take effect here by August 17th. This video, we're going to break down exactly what those changes look like, and we're not going to sell you on the idea of hiring a real estate agent. Not everybody needs one. I'm also not going to sell you on the idea of paying a high commission or whatever that looks like. Instead, the goal is just to make sure that you're informed of these changes, what they look like, how they impact you, and ultimately so you can make the best decision and negotiate the best deal for yourself moving forward. Now, before we get into all of the specifics, these changes will look different on a state-by-state basis. So what we're discussing about the Kansas City market will look very different in like a California, Texas, Florida, at least right now. And that's because every state is interpreting these changes very differently from one another. Now, we'll start by discussing then versus now, what those two major changes look like. Second, we're going to take a look at some data and how this major change could impact the sale and purchase of properties here in Kansas City moving forward. And then finally, we'll attempt to answer some most asked questions about how these changes could impact you. So starting with the first part of the video, in the past versus these changes moving forward. In the past, if a property came on the market, let's say maybe you were actively looking for a home, but you hadn't contacted an agent yet. You have no paperwork, you have no agency agreement with an agent, but there's a property you really want to see. Well, in the past, you did have the ability to call up an agent, and as long as they were willing to show you the property, they could do that without any paperwork involved. Of course, it was always best practice to have that client relationship set up beforehand, but it wasn't an obligation until now. Moving forward, one of the major changes is that before seeing any properties with a buyer's agent specifically, you'll have to have some sort of agency agreement in place that outlines their compensation for showing you, representing you, negotiating for you, etc., what their duties are to you as a client, and this would have to be done before they actually tour or show a property to you. Now, we'll discuss here at the end of the video specifically how that could look moving forward, how it impacts you. What if I don't want to sign some agreement before going and seeing a property? We'll address that all here in just a second, but first major change is that moving forward, if you're going to see a property with a buyer's representative, you'll have to have some signed agency agreement in place before going and touring the property. Number two is that cooperative compensation, meaning the listing agent and a buyer's agent sharing their compensation, it's no longer allowed. They're actually being decoupled entirely. So in the past, what that looked like is, let's say that I'm selling my home. I've decided to hire a listing agent to sell it. Well, before I officially hire them, before it goes live on the market, we would identify, well, how much am I going to compensate them from my proceeds at the closing table? We would also identify, well, do we want to pay the buyer's real estate agent as well? And out of those proceeds, how much goes to the buyer's agent? In other words, the listing agent, the buyer's agent, they would be sharing that compensation that the sellers agreed to pay the listing agent. Now what this will look like is the seller compensates the listing agent. The buyer, if they choose to hire a buyer's agent, would be responsible for compensating the buyer's agent. What this does not necessarily mean is that the buyer is coming out of pocket to pay their agent's compensation. In fact, that is what's going to be negotiated moving forward. Of course, it is an option for them to do that, but more likely than not, what we're going to see in most transactions where there is a buyer's agent is the home buyer, let's say they find a property that they want to write an offer on. Well, part of that offer is going to be requesting that the seller cover the compensation to their buyer's agent so they don't have to come out of pocket. Now, there are several scenarios of how this will work and how it all breaks down. We'll answer a lot of those questions here at the end, but the major two changes to know about is number one, there has to be some sort of agreement in place before a buyer's agent shows you a property. And second, compensation is completely decoupled, and the buyer's agent's compensation, that will be a point of negotiation on any offers moving forward where there is a buyer's agent involved. Also, if I haven't mentioned it yet, all of these changes are going into effect August 17th. So if you're already under contract on something, it's not going to affect you. The previous rules would apply. But moving forward, if you are not under contract on the sale or purchase of a property, things are going to change and agreements are going to have to be updated. If you haven't signed anything, that's fine. You're a fresh slate, but there's going to be some sort of adjustment period here. And that's what we want to prepare you for. So part number two of the video is all about the data of what we have from the past model. Now, I've got a whole lot of charts and data, this article to show you, a couple specific to the Kansas City area to show you. But before we get into all of that stuff, the first thing that we've got to discuss is that the major reason behind these changes, the lawsuit settlement from the get-go, is to make it absolutely clear to the the consumer that real estate agent compensation is not fixed, there's no set price, and that is entirely negotiable. Of course, over the past several years, we've seen discount brokers pop up that offer to sell your house for a 1% fee, for a flat fee, and anything in between. But not everybody's felt that compensation has always been negotiable, especially if you've decided to sell your home, and let's say you interviewed 3 or 4 agents and they all told you that they charge the same amount. I would absolutely feel that it wasn't something that I could necessarily negotiate. And moving forward, these changes, the intent is to make it clear that it is in fact negotiable. And there will be many different ways that you can compensate an agent. It doesn't have to be a flat, it doesn't have to be a specific percent. It could be a flat fee. It could be a retainer. It could be dollar per hour. And we're going to see quite a few different models unfold, and it'll be interesting to track over the next couple of years. Now, I'm going to show you data specific to the Kansas City real estate market. What I did is I went through our multiple listing service. I looked at the buyer agent compensation over the last 2 years in Johnson County specifically. Otherwise, it would have been way too much data. I took all of those transactions from the last 2 years, uploaded them into ChatGPT because it would be impossible to analyze all of those myself, and it spit out a couple graphs. So here's the first one. It shows all of the different compensation rates. So you've got a 3%, you've got a 2.75%, a 2.5%, 2%, 2.25. So you've got quite an array here, but you can see it's hard to ignore that most of them were around a 3%. Of course, I do have a pie chart as well to give you a better idea here. You can see that about 85% of the sales in Johnson County the last 2 years offered about 3% to the buyer's agent. About 1% were like 2.75%. Quite a few more that were offering 2.5% at around 10.8%. And then of course, anybody who offered a flat fee or something other than the numbers shown that amounted to 1.2%. But the reason I'm showing you this is because in the past, what we have based on that data is about 85.5% of the market was paying 3%. So even though you do have multiple different options and some real estate agents might work for less, and there's nothing stopping you from offering a 2%, but under the old model, you can see that the market has decided that 3% is approximately what most home sellers choose to pay their real estate agent. Now, this article from Redfin actually tips that on its head. It says that since the lawsuit settlement was announced that agent compensation would be changing, we've seen some sort of decrease in how much agents are compensated. And we're really not going to get into the specifics of this article. I'm actually going to scroll down to the bottom where it actually identifies the average percent commission 4 weeks ending in January 28th compared to the average commission 4 weeks ending in July 14th. Now, of course, there's some sort of seasonality here that we have to account for. It's going to be pretty hard to account for that because we'd just be spitballing. But you can see the last 4 weeks in January, the average compensation was about a 2.9%. Since that lawsuit settlement, we've seen a drop of about 0.07%. But the point I'm trying to get across is we're going to see a shift. And even though over the last several years there's been a lot of home sellers deciding to compensate a buyer's agent at 3%, that's no longer guaranteed. And that could very well shift. And what we'll notice, just like any other industry, is that the market's going to decide on a market rate. And while you're certainly going to have choices above, below, and everywhere in between that market rate, it's very similar to buying an airplane ticket, right? You can choose to fly first class, or you can choose to fly economy, but you're gonna have a very different experience depending on what you choose to do. Now, moving on to part number 3 of the video, frequently asked questions. There's a good chance that this video does not age very well. Based on what we know today, I'm going to answer these questions to the best of my ability, but hindsight's always 20/20 and things could very well change. The market could shift. So show me a little bit of mercy if you're watching this 3 years in the future and I'm just dead wrong on all of these things. So number 1 is, do I really need to sign an agreement with a real estate agent, with a buyer's agent before touring properties? And the answer is yes, even though in the past it was very convenient to call up an agent, as long as they were willing to show it to you without an agreement in place. Like, that was nice. Your feet aren't held to the fire in a long-term contract. Nobody wants that. And that's the major fear, is if I'm interviewing multiple different agents, I want to see what they got in the field. I want to see what it's like if they show me a property before committing to one long-term. And I strongly believe that that is something that you should be able to do. So something that most real estate agents may tend to do in the future is they might offer some sort of short term so you can try before you buy, right? You can go out and tour 1 or 2 houses with them, see if they're showing up prepared. Are they showing up on time? Have they researched the market? Are you getting along? Is it what you expected? Before you decide to make a longer term commitment. And that would be my solution. If you're kind of on the fence, I'm not sure if I want to commit long term, tour a couple properties, make it a shorter term agreement, and then have that conversation later on once you do decide that, hey, I feel comfortable committing to you long term. That's at least going to be my solution moving forward. So if you do have any interest in that, I can walk you through the process. We've got to work around. My goal is not to hold your feet to the fire in some sort of very long-term agreement before you're comfortable working with me or before you've decided that. Now, the last thing that I want to say here is if you choose not to hire a buyer's agent and instead go directly through the listing agent, you don't need an agreement in place, right? They're fulfilling their duty to the seller, so you wouldn't have to have an agreement in place. The real question is, if they have a bunch of different properties listed, are they going to be able to fit you in to show the property? I think that's where, we're going to have to figure out what that looks like moving forward. It could be different for each individual listing agent, but that'll be one of the interesting things that the market works out and adapts to over time. Now, moving on to frequently asked question number 2, will sellers stop offering to pay the buyer agent's compensation? Absolutely, some will. Some are going to test the boundaries. This has been going on. This is why people would sell for sale by owner or hire a flat fee broker or pay a real estate agent who's willing to do it for 1%. Absolutely. If you can save someone, like nobody wants to pay a compensation at the end of the day unless it makes them more money. Just because you offer compensation doesn't mean you necessarily have to accept an offer that results in a net lower sale price for you. That's another important caveat. Just because you offer it doesn't mean you necessarily have to accept an offer requesting it, right? This is going to be on an offer per offer basis, and that's something we'll talk about in part number 3. But at the end of the day, yes, we will see some home sellers testing the boundaries. They should. This is a new framework. The market's going to have to adapt to it. If their properties sell for a similar amount on a similar timeline and they get more money, more home sellers are going to choose to go that route. However, if it takes them longer to sell, if they sell for less, if they get fewer showings, they might choose to reconsider, in which we again see some sort of market correction. And it may look like same old and not much change after all. But this will take like 2, 3, probably a whole decade worth of data to really get to the bottom of what these changes do to the market and how agents are compensated and what this does to you if you're selling your home. So my gut tells me that most likely we won't see that happen. In fact, this will be more on an offer per offer basis, which means if you write a great offer, even if they're covering your agent's compensation, they'll probably be happy to take the deal. And that leads us to question number 3, which is kind of the flip side of this, which is, will buyers have to pay their buyer's agent out of their own pocket? Now, obviously, as a home buyer, you don't have to hire a buyer's agent. You could very well try your hand at going directly through the listing agent and seeing if you can negotiate, if there's some room to negotiate. More likely, it's going to be a little bit more work for them, and they're going to either charge you to write the contract, they're going to charge the seller, there might not be that room for negotiation. It'll vary based on every single listing agreement and every seller. However, when it comes to you hiring a buyer's agent when purchasing a property, there are a couple different scenarios that can unfold. The first one is, let's say that you ask the seller to cover your agent's full compensation and the seller says no, or they write a counter offer. You have the ability to restructure your offer. You can restructure your agreement with your real estate agent and adjust that compensation. Number 3 is you can choose to pay the difference out of your own pocket. Number 4 is you can choose to walk away and go and pursue another property. But again, just like the answer to number 2, most likely this is going to happen on an offer per offer basis. It's going to depend on you and your agent's ability to negotiate with the home seller, understand what the home seller wants, and structure the offer in a way that makes sure that they get a great net sales price compared to any other offers they might have on the table. Now, I know that was a whole lot of information. We'll make more videos as the norms update. We get more information on these things. I could be wrong on some of them, but I'll be sure to update you and make videos so that you're informed about all of these changes that are happening, so you can take advantage of all of them. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. All of my contact information is down below the video. Just a quick recap, the 2 major changes. Number 1 is if you're hiring a buyer's agent, got to have some sort of agreement in place. The term can certainly be negotiable, but it's got to be in place before you go into a property. And then the second major change is that compensation for agents is going to be decoupled and will be negotiated, at least for the buyer's agent, on an offer per offer basis. And new norms will be developed, the market will be tested. And as long as you've got a good buyer's agent who can negotiate for you, understands the market, and can structure an offer correctly, you're going to be in a really good position moving forward. So once again, any questions? I know this stuff is pretty confusing. It'll be really interesting to see a little bit of turbulence over the next few months as both agents adapt, lenders adapt, and the market adapts to all of this. So feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. And before you go, make sure to hit the like button if you found this informative or helpful. And make sure to click right here to watch the video YouTube thinks you would enjoy the most, or click right here to see the most recent market update about Kansas Kansas City home prices. So click either here or here, and I'll see you on the next one.